Ready, set, go. What is up, Jeremy Sharp?
Hey, good to be here. How are you doing?
I'm great, man. Thanks for coming over. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard a lot about you and enjoyed the conversation that we had just before we started. So,
hopefully you heard good things.
I heard wonderful things. That's why I threw you an invite, brother. That's why I threw you an invite. However, I'm looking forward to picking your brain and getting to know you a little more.
Cool.
You're from North Georgia.
Yeah, originally from a little town called Dahlonega. I moved up here about a year ago to take a job right after I graduated school. So I've been up in the mountains for a good 15, 16 years now.
Cool.
And I don't miss the hustle and bustle of Atlanta whatsoever.
Yeah. How far away from Atlanta were you?
About an hour and 15 minutes.
Okay.
So it's close enough, but far enough away.
Close enough to go enjoy the festivities on the weekend, but not too close to like get caught up in the traffic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Atlanta's growing and it's slowly encroaching on us, but you know we're holding out up there in Dahlonega. So
I hear you. So you moved here to take a job.
Yeah, I currently work with the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition, which is based out of Wilmington. A lot of folks are familiar with them. They've been an advocacy group here in North Carolina for about 20 years. And there's a variety of programs that they work with. Some of them are based with law enforcement assisted diversion. I myself run a syringe exchange program. That's one of the big things. North Carolina Harm Reduction is known for, they're known for passing laws, legislative action in the Capitol. They helped write and develop the medical amnesty policy. They wrote the syringe exchange program law, and they're currently working on a bill to ban the box. So when an applicant tries to get a job, they don't have to put down the fact that they've been arrested. They wait until the interview process. And that's pretty important because, a lot of times when somebody just looks good on paperwork, or when you just see the paper, you see a felony, a drug conviction, something like that, you're just going to nix that person, even though that might be a very well-qualified candidate. So that's a very important piece of legislation that the organization is currently working on. We're also trying to work against drug-induced homicide laws. So if me and you are, say, using together, and I went down the road and I got the bag for you, I'm actually a murderer, according to this particular law, if it's passed, if you were to pass away from it, even though, most people that do drugs distribute drugs to their friends. So we're really afraid with this particular law that we're going to see a lot more incarceration. We're also afraid that our medical amnesty policy will be eroded and that people will be afraid to reach out for help in a drug and alcohol situation because they're now facing a murder charge. So those are just a couple of things the organization is currently working on. There's about 20 or so employees with North Carolina Harm Reduction, and we're all throughout the state. There's about 3 of them that work with me here in Haywood. And we've produced some pretty amazing results over the last year. Really proud of my colleagues.
Awesome. Since you went there, this was on my radar to ask you about.
Okay.
Well, let's just start right here.
Cool.
Death by distribution. That's what you're talking about?
Yep.
It's the new bill. It passed, or they're working on it still?
I think it just got introduced a few weeks ago.
Okay.
And, the Prosecutors Association and the Sheriff's Association, 2 very powerful lobbies, are advocating for this. And they'd actually introduced a bill last year, but it was shot down by the Medical Association here in North Carolina because, according to the language, doctors were actually drug dealers. And the doctor stepped in and said, oh, hold on one second. Those prescription pills that I gave somebody or distributed or wrote the script for, they had a problem with the language. So it didn't go too far in the legislature last year.
It's one of those, kind of tricky things where if you look at it like the average layperson in this community, right, were to see on the headlines of WLOS death by distribution and we're targeting drug dealers, right, it could get some support, right? It has some support. I saw all the headlines last week or the week before when the bill was introduced. And so I brought it up in class, in conversation. I threw it out there just as a way to gauge how some of my classmates felt, but also how my instructors felt. And I was completely shocked by the response that I got. There wasn't one person that was opposed to it. Immediately, their gut reaction was oh, yes, I think that's a great thing. And I just kind of sat back and kind of observed how people responded. And it's like one of those things where like without looking at it completely objectively and saying like what type of true impacts could this type of bill have on people like you and me. Like, I'm a former drug user. Have I ever purchased drugs for a friend? Absolutely, right? That totally could have been me facing those types of charges. And yeah, I totally can empathize with those who have lost loved ones to overdoses. But a bill like this, we learned from the war on drugs, right? Like, will a bill like this remove harmful drugs from our communities? Probably not, right?
Well, my first response is, if jails work, they'd stop building them. And, that might be a radical response, but I'm just going to throw that out there. The biggest problem I have with the language in this law is it does go after the lower level consumers. There's no distinction between myself and Pablo Escobar. If I might be a little less radical than some of the people that I work with in that, sometimes I look at drug dealing as a predatory action. But when I go down the road and get something for my friend and we both take it and he passes away, there was no malice in that. We just simply got some bad stuff. And now, according to the law, I'm a murderer. And, that's just going to result in increased incarceration rates. I don't think it's going to solve the problem whatsoever. When you think about it, there's various reasons that people get into using drugs. There's social reasons, economic reasons. A lot of people are dealing with adverse childhood experiences, their parents got divorced, whatever it is. And the key to helping reduce addiction within our communities is to find ways in which we can really work through those issues. And a law like this that's, cut and dry, if you sell drugs, get drugs for a friend, it's murder, in my opinion, is going to make things worse. I think, again, people are going to be afraid to reach out for help. We've done a lot of work over the last 5 or 6 years in building bridges between drug-using communities and police with expanded Naloxone policies. Cops, a lot of times when they sign up for the job, they sign up to be heroes. When I put Narcan in their hands and they run into a house and they save somebody's life, that dude's a hero. But I think people are going to be very afraid to call police. They're going to be afraid to cooperate with them. And I think it's going to exacerbate the issue. Another thing, too, is we're actually to a point, North Carolina has one of the highest increases in overdose rates. Over the last year, we've had 3,000 plus reversals with our Narcan that we've distributed in North Carolina. And our preliminary results are showing that we're actually reducing overdose rates here in North Carolina. We've gotten a lot of Narcan out over the last year. And, I'm kind of afraid that if they pass this and we keep doing what we're doing and the overdose rates go down, a lot of the credit's going to go to legislative pieces that have actually made things worse. Again, that kind of contradicts what I said in that, there might be higher increased overdose rates because people are afraid to reach out to the police, to the paramedics that carry the Narcan. But, we have to look at this as an ebb and flow. And I think we've reached our pinnacle, or we did at least last year. So I support policies that are evidence-based, and this policy to me seems like something that belongs in the 1980s. It's something that Nancy Reagan would be supporting. Not that Nancy Reagan's a bad person, but this just say no attitude, lock them up, throw away the key. We've been doing this for 30, 40 years, and it hasn't produced results. It's actually produced the current epidemic that we're currently in. And I'm terrified that this law will pass and it'll be picked up by other states. And, there's a lot of good people that use drugs. And, I just think it's going to make things a lot worse overall.
Where did this bill come from? Because, like you said, you've mentioned we've made crossed so many bridges and building and mending relationships with law enforcement. And so how did it get initiated?
Well, it's been initiated by the Prosecutors Association, from my understanding. And, you know, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, I guess is the best way to put it. Again, when somebody goes to jail, they don't receive treatment. Very often they're going through a process where they're receiving a lot of trauma, there's abuse, there's assault, and it's just an overall bad experience for people. So sending people to a place that's bad, I don't think is going to have good results.
Yeah. Are there ways where we could adjust or change the way that our Good Samaritan laws are written to kind of protect the individuals that we're talking about right now, so that if this bill does pass, that it will solely target drug dealers?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk of increasing the immunities and having a more defined, I guess, Good Samaritan law, in that we would raise the threshold for drug possession for the immunities. So right now in North Carolina, it's over a gram of hard substance is when you lose the immunity for medical amnesty. And the way that it's worded, too, if I remember correctly, is that it's up to officer discretion after that. So the officer has the choice of whether or not to arrest somebody. So
it's a roll the dice, brother.
yeah, you know, there's a lot of different things that go in. You know, is this person a person of color? Is it somebody who's been going in and out of arrest? Do the police have a history with them? Or is it a kid from the suburbs? So, you know, that discretion, you know, it's up in the air. And having a clearly defined immunity, you know, and increasing the threshold would definitely strengthen our medical amnesty policy and encourage more people to reach out for help. You could tweak the current legislation and make it to where you have to be like a big-time kingpin, but developing that threshold, developing those wording, that particular wording, and you know, getting a prosecutor to convict somebody who's a bigger drug dealer, it's going to be hard. So currently there is a drug-induced homicide law, but the prosecutors have to prove malice. So that's me, you're sleeping with my girlfriend, or, you know, something crazy like that, and I give you a bad bag. Well, I didn't post it on Facebook that I did this for a reason. It's really hard to prove malice. And right now, with the wording with this particular piece of legislation that's up before the General Assembly here, anybody who gets anything, it could result in a murder charge.
Could fall under that. Now, one of the things that concerns me about it is I could see an individual being charged with this crime and then tying up our court system and costing financial dollars, and then struggling to produce sufficient evidence to prove that that individual was the one that provided the drugs. Like, how do they anticipate being able to prove where the drugs came from?
Well, if I were to be arrested for shooting somebody for murder, it would cost the system about $426,000 just for that trial. Now, that doesn't include the price for incarceration and all that good stuff. But what was your question again?
How are they going to connect the dots to the person that actually provided the drugs?
Generally what they do is during the investigatory piece, the first thing they go for is the cell phone.
Phone records?
Mm-hmm. Phone records. And then, you know, if it's a group of people around and they're all facing murder charges, well, the first thing they're going to do is tell on the
Roll
person.
somebody.
And, yeah, that's what's going to happen.
So what do you see, where do you see this thing landing? What would be worst case scenario for,
well,
in your point of view, and then maybe best case scenario?
If we get a very strict law, you know, that's a very worst case scenario where, you know, it clearly defines that anybody who gets the drugs for somebody else is guilty of murder. And there's so many problems with the illegal market. You know, you never know what you're getting. You know, there's no malice for that. You know, we both have $20. I go down the road because, you know, that's my old college roommate. I know him a little bit better. And, you know, we both take it. My tolerance is a little bit higher, and you pass away. Again, I'm a murderer. Kind of a middle ground would for there to be some sort of language written into the bill to where it really goes after the drug kingpins. The best case scenario is the legislature doesn't want to pass this, and they want to strengthen our medical amnesty laws. I deal with drug overdoses every day, and I think this is probably one of the worst pieces of legislation that can happen to us this year.
And that's why it caught me by such surprise, just because like the harm reduction efforts, specifically in this state, have been so leaning towards the drug users and supporting them and like cultivating and building relationships with the individuals who are currently using drugs, from law enforcement diversion programs to needle exchange to fentanyl testing. Like I've seen so much in the last few years that like this thing just kind of like caught me off guard, somebody that's not really involved in policy and looking at like what's on the table all the time. Like I find it very confusing as to like why all of a sudden.
Like I said, it's ebb and flow. And then I think especially in Republican-dominated states, a lot of these more extreme views over the last 2 or 3 years have kind of gained a more solid foundation. Mm-hmm. And that might be some of it too.
Could it be in a response to that heavy increase in overdoses?
I would think so. I would think that has something to do with it. I would imagine there's a lot of political pressure to solve this issue. As a legislature who develops a piece of legislation and it turns into a correlation for reduced overdose rates, I can go around town and, tout my own horn. Yeah. Granted, it's being developed by, I believe, the Prosecutors Association. And like I said before, they're trying to send everybody to jail. Yeah. I didn't say that before.
That's their job, right?
Well, a lot of times with prosecutors, it's like a batting average. I'm, Willie Mays or whomever, and or whoever, and I get paid based on how many hits I get or how many home runs. That's how prosecutors are judged, is on their conviction rates.
You're a Braves fan, man?
Dude, I love Braves.
But I could totally almost see this thing backfiring in that, like, they're going to bring charges on somebody and then not be able to prove guilt.
It's possible, but, I see it more so as a leverage piece for a police investigation. Now we've got a group of kids, let's say at Western Carolina here, they're 19, 20 years old. They separate them, put them in an interrogation room, and they tell them they're all going to jail for years and years and years. And that, for the police, is a tool to leverage to get who the real drug suppliers were.
Mm-hmm. How would you suggest somebody learn about these policies? Like, is there a website, a place to go, a place to kind of study this type of information? Because like I mentioned, like the initial gut reaction of my instructors and my classmates were like in full support of it. I saw local law enforcement who have identified themselves as recovery allies posting on Facebook in support of it. It completely shocked me.
It doesn't shock me whatsoever, because most people haven't lived through it and they don't really know what it is. And like I said, it's a tool for law enforcement, so they're looking forward to it. If somebody were wanting to learn about these types of legislative pieces, they could visit North Carolina Harm Reduction's website, nchc.org, and click on, I believe, the Laws tab. And it'll have a list of legislative pieces that have passed in the past. And it should have a link to some of the legislation that we're working on right now. If not, you can just do a Google search. There's also a girl named Tessie Castilla. She used to work with us, and she's kind of gone on to do her own things. She's actually been our legislative advocate in the Capitol. If you were to search her name, a multitude of pieces would come up. I believe most of them that she's written are through The Fix, which is a recovery-oriented...
decent publication. I know a few people that write for them.
Yeah, they do good work. And, Tess is an amazing advocate, and she puts the pen to paper better than I could ever describe. So yeah. I would suggest looking her up.
I spent some time just reflecting on this whole conversation throughout the week without doing all that research that you just described. Just kind of like thinking about my personal experience surrounding this topic, and like my initial train of thought was I went back to 2010 when my cousin passed away from an overdose in Charlotte. And at that time I was living in Tampa, Florida, and the opioid heroin scene hadn't really hit down there. It was kind of like pre-pill mills on every corner down there in Florida. And I can remember getting that phone call and really questioning and like thinking about like what happened and what went down in this particular situation. And it was like the perfect storm. Like they didn't call 911. They tried to take her to the hospital instead of calling 911, where she could have gotten potentially received Narcan. They didn't drive directly to the closest hospital. They, took a different route or whatever. But my initial response back then in 2010 was like, where'd she get the stuff from? And I spent a lot of time like thinking about like this exact scenario, kind of like a victim mentality, right? Like, why did this happen? How did this happen? Looking for, my mind wanted to find somebody to blame. And I think that's our natural response to situations like this, but generally like any type of traumatic situation, like we want to point the finger at somebody needs to pay, right? But if you like take a step back and look at it from the point of view of exactly what you described so far, is that like 5, 10, 15 years later, like I could have been that guy, right? Like I was always buying bags of cocaine for a big party for my friends, and you know what I mean? And like I always had probably more on me than the Good Samaritan law protects, you know? So like my mind's looking for somebody to place the blame in the situation with my cousin who passed. However, only a few years later, like I totally could have been that person. You know what I mean? And like I thought a lot about this, that like back then when I was using drugs, like fentanyl wasn't out in the streets. Like I would be lucky if I would have made it out today, and I spent so much time and effort creating these resentments towards whoever it was. But are they really the person to blame? It probably was a close friend of hers that got her the drugs. Like 9 times out of 10 it is. Also another drug user, like we've talked about tonight. Does that person deserve to be charged with murder? Tying it back to your ban the box at the beginning, like I feel so privileged that I was never charged with a felony, and so many people that I interact with. So like we're talking about not only charging somebody with murder, but like putting this baggage on them that they're going to carry with them for the rest of their lives. When you look at it, they're doing the same thing that our loved one, that we are looking to place blame on their death on somebody that our loved one was doing. They're doing the same behavior, the same action, Yeah,
without a doubt. I mean, our ultimate goal is to reduce the harms associated with drug use as a harm reductionist, with our organization. And, if you charge somebody with murder, no matter what, it's not going to bring that person back. And our perception is now it's going to make it more difficult for those people to reach out for help. They're going to be more afraid of law enforcement. So,
and that's what gets me, is that we've put so much effort in cultivating relationships with law enforcement, and like here locally, we have like very healthy relationships with them. That I see this being a potential barrier in all of this effort that we've previously done.
Yeah, I mean, I'm terrified of it. I've been working on this stuff for 5 years, and it's almost like it's going to fade away. A lot of the progress that we've made, especially in bridging those gaps with law enforcement. And when you talk to them too, they'll tell you things. We can't arrest our way out of this issue. We need to, have more policies that support and don't punish. Yet you're at the Capitol advocating for these policies, or going around town posting things on Facebook about how you should support them. It just kind of seems like maybe some of that talk is lip service.
Yeah, it's like we've worked together side by side at various types of events and programs and services to where we've, mutually speaking, we've kind of earned each other's trust. And now it seems like that trust is kind of being removed from the conversation. I was shocked when I saw that post on Facebook, dude. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not going to say it right here in front of everybody, but I was completely shocked when I saw that.
Yeah, it stinks. It's the only way to look at it.
Yeah, it totally does. Now, coming from Georgia, and you'd worked a lot on policy and kind of harm reduction type stuff in Georgia. Is there a difference in the type of work that's being done here and the type of work that's being done down in Georgia?
I would say that the police here in North Carolina are a lot more altruistic. There's a lot more support for harm reduction. You have police at recovery rallies. So I think you guys have I came to North Carolina because there's a lot more support for it. We have a better medical amnesty policy. It's actually known as the gold standard throughout the U.S. Georgia's, yeah. And basically, North Carolina passed their law, and we took North Carolina's law and we made it better. You know, It's like the BSAF commercials. We didn't make the law; we just made it better.
And you were involved in that process?
Yeah. So I got involved. I met a dude named Robert Childs at a bar in New Orleans that didn't have a name. And actually sat down with him, had a 12-course meal for free. Interesting story how I met Robert. But anyways, he let me on to the fact that Georgia was working on a law. So he told me to call my editor and get a story. And I called the editor of the local newspaper, and they ended up putting me on the front page. Well, I kind of took that momentum, and I built up support on 6 different universities in Georgia. We did things like phone lobbying. We did events on campus. We got in the newspapers, and then we went to the legislature and probably talked to 50, 60 different legislative legislative members of the General Assembly, spoke before a couple of legislative councils, committees, and, it was a coalition. We played a part, and we supported what was going on in, the legislature, and we worked under a group called Georgia Overdose Prevention, and basically it was made up of moms and family members and friends who had lost their friends to overdose. And, I grew up around Atlanta, and I tell folks I basically lost a generation to people to overdose. And the common denominator in all these drug deaths is they were at a party. They were around a group of people who didn't call for help. Lost a good friend named Austin. It was his 21st birthday, and he had a birthday party for him. Had alcohol, a couple different pharmaceuticals, and Austin turned purple on him. So what did? They threw him in a shower, and they let him sleep it off. By the time somebody checked in on him, he was dead. They called 911. It was a rural county. By the time the ambulance got there, he'd passed for an hour and a half. And, when we were advocating for these laws, we had so many people come up and tell us similar stories.
The story that I just shared was very similar to that.
I'm telling you. And, that's the thing about it is in each of these counties, we've recorded hundreds and hundreds of naloxone reversals administered by police. These cops are running in a county like Jackson or Macon or Haywood, there's only a couple ambulances around. And, there's more cops. There's cops, in different precincts and stuff like that. So very often they're the very first people at the scene of an overdose. So having them equipped with Narcan, it just makes sense. There's a lady back in Haywood named Jean, and she claims that she can train a monkey to use Narcan. Not saying that police are monkeys or anything like that, but it's very easy for somebody to use. You just squirt it up their nose. It brings them back. And, those medical amnesty policies save lives. In the county that I was working in, when we passed our law, in 2013, there was 84 calls for help. In 2014, the year the law passed, it had risen to 396. So, it's conducive of a couple things. The opioid epidemic's in full swing, but most importantly, people are not afraid to reach out for help. There's a couple different groups in the county that were going around educating people on universities and high schools and the drug-using communities and letting them know that, hey, the good news, we're spreading the good news. You won't get into help if you're just using drugs and you call 911. And, I think 49 of the 50 states now have some sort of medical amnesty policy. And when you look at places like Boston or, places like Ohio, these policies are used constantly. So, having those erode away, I think can be very perverse. It's also futile, and we're never going to solve this issue by arresting people. And not only is it futile, but we can cause a lot of harm by removing these policies. Like you mentioned before, there's been so much progress that's been made by law enforcement. And, the law enforcement officers and officials that are, advocating for recovery, for harm reduction, to me, they're heroes. But this particular law will negate a lot of that work again.
Mm-hmm. So why is there resistance in implementing a law or making adjustments to our current law to make it similar to what you guys did in Georgia? Like, where is the resistance?
I haven't been on I haven't been at the General Assembly to hear verbatim what's going on, but what they're saying is, well, we're giving you guys Narcan, so why do you need?
We're paying for Narcan, so
yeah, and they do. We get a lot of money for Narcan, and we distributed over 100,000 kits in the last 5 or 6 years, and most of these, 99% of it go to people who use drugs. That's kind of the deal with the devil, I guess, is, well, you're getting Narcan and you can save lives, so don't necessarily worry about this. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get into the mindset of the people who are advocating for this particular legislation, and I guess that they believe arresting people and putting them in jail, that fear of arrest, could be beneficial in reducing overdoses. But like I said before, we've been trying to arrest our way out of this issue for 40, 50 years. And to me, the definition, if you look it up, of insanity is repetition of the same thing over and over again. I think that we should look at these policies, medical amnesty and naloxone access policies, and see that they do work. They do remove the fear of arrest. They do build relationships with police. They do turn cops into heroes. And we should build off of that. We should strengthen our law. But I've spoken with a couple people in legislative committees, and the 2 or 3 people that I've spoken with, I think, are no longer bill sponsors for this. So, maybe it is taking it one step at a time, one legislative member at a time, and really allowing people who use drugs, who have gone through the criminal justice system to tell their stories. Hey, I'm just a regular guy, but at one point in time, I got drugs for my friend. I'm not Pablo, Pablo Escobar or George Young or whoever. I was just a regular guy going down the road and getting this stuff. And, like I said before, the problem with the illegal market is you never know what you're getting. And right now, 90% of the dope that we test contains fentanyl in it. It's in the cocaine, it's in the methamphetamines, it's pressed in prescription pills. So in reality, people are playing Russian roulette. And the thing is, the fear of arrest has never deterred somebody from using drugs. It's just made using the drugs a lot more dangerous.
Yeah. How can an average member of our community let their voice be heard that they don't agree with these policies?
Well, there's simple things like Facebook posts and stuff like that. But if you really disagree with these policies, you have to remember your police, your sheriff, your legislative members, they all work for you. This is a democracy. We elect them, we pay taxes, we put them in office. So if a group of people from Jackson County reaches out to the state rep, to the senator from here, and lets them know that, hey, these policies, I believe, are going to be extremely detrimental, I think it's going to make stuff worse. And this is why. This is my personal story. This is the story of my friend. These are the things that my generation went through, or these are the things that I went through. When we get before our legislative members and we tell those stories, we change hearts and minds every single time.
Beautiful. We need to connect, man. We need to like get this message out there for real. Like,
let's brainstorm later.
Let's do it, dude. The ban the box policy. Where does that thing stand? And
it just got introduced. I don't know who the state rep was. I don't know if it's a Democrat or Republican. But I think, again, that's going to kind of be our concession.
Because I moved here in like 2015, and I've heard talks of it like being presented over and over and over again, but to not.
Well, we finally got a sound piece of legislation. Okay. And, it's 2019. It's a long time coming. When you look at places like Atlanta or, other places that implemented this, it's been proven to be beneficial. Again, that particular thing. I'm a convicted felon. I've got a DUI. I've got a marijuana charge. When I'm going before, say, Duke Power or whoever, that particular segment of the application really just kind of negates anything that you've done. People don't want to look at. They want to look at you as a criminal. And when you have a guy who has less experience but doesn't have a criminal record, they're going to choose that guy because he's not convicted for methamphetamine possession 15 years ago,
My concern with the whole policy, and this is based off of personal experience, is that how do we convince the corporations and the individuals who are actually making the decisions, hiring the employees, because like I do a lot of this. I hold this conversation often in my place of work, downtown, my little part-time job, and with various employers. And what the issue that I've run into is that I will, like my boss, she's a super recovery ally. She supports all the work that I do. She supports this podcast. She supports recovery in our community. And so a number of times we're always hired, seasonally, Christmas, holidays, summer, things like that. And a number of times I've introduced her to a potential employer. She has been willing to overlook the background or whatever box is checked and given that individual a face-to-face interview. She has wanted to hire said individual. However, corporate requires a background check. So she meets with them face to face. She does an interview. She likes the employee. She wants to hire him. We do a criminal background check. Corporate says no, right? So it's like, though she's the decision maker in the store, right? And they tell her she's empowered to run your own store and this and that. And so she's willing and able to overlook this checkered past. The individual is able to come and sit down with her and be completely honest and sell himself. Hey, I'm a person in recovery now. These are the things that I'm doing. I'm enrolled in school. I'm a 3.0 average. I'm active in the recovery community. Yet it's still, her hands are still tied through corporate. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. HR can be a pain in the butt.
For real.
Especially if it's a larger corporation. And they've got policies in place. And generally they'll go to, insurance liabilities or something like that as, the rationale behind denying somebody employment. So I guess the key is we can't do anything about what corporate says. They're their own entity. But with this particular issue, it would be very beneficial for, public employees, stuff like that. But what's important, too, is now that person has met with your boss. And if your boss really likes him, thinks he's a great guy, and thinks that they should look past that coke charge that was 10 years old, now she has the opportunity to advocate for
him.
And that's what we're hoping for. When you look at medical marijuana and say, Oklahoma. I don't think Oklahoma has medical. But, in a state out west, DirecTV can still deny employment for somebody who uses the medical marijuana, and that's their right. This piece of legislation wouldn't change that. It would just get that person in the door.
Give them a seat at the table. Yeah, it was so almost demoralizing. He was all excited, and to see the life just get sucked out of him after the fact, after he had his hopes up and he went through the interview and he sold himself, and she was on board and she loved him and she was looking forward to to hiring him. He was very forthcoming about his past and very forthcoming about his recovery and the things that he's done since then. But it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the thing about it is I consider myself a Christian, and, as a Christian, we believe in redemption from our sins. However, corporations, governments, there's really no leeway in that. So,
and really, if you take a step back and look at it, this society in general, there is no real path to redemption. People like Roseanne, right? Roseanne got in trouble for a very questionable tweet, and she was terminated from her employment and lost her job, and her show was canceled and all this, whether you agree with it or not.
Right.
There's no and so now she's ostracized from mainstream media. And yeah, she has some issues going on. She's been very forthcoming about it, talking about her mental health at the time and her substance use at the time. And so that was just an example. There is no clear path to forgiveness and path to redeeming, what you had, or for simple little mistakes like that. I think it's almost like a societal type issue.
It definitely is a societal issue, and we need to change that, really. It's a lot easier to look down on somebody than it is to reach out your hand and bring them up. Granted, it just takes a little bit more time to reach out that hand and bring them up, but we've kind of been taught to look down on people, whether they're poor or of a different color or whatever. We other people, and that's what a drug convention does, is it others that person. And the dangerous part about that is with your friend, like you said, it made him discouraged. So he's a person in recovery. Let's say he's been drinking for 10 years straight. Well, when that happens, the first thing that he thinks is, damn, I'm going to go to that brewery and grab a beer,
I got one even better. His only skill set prior to this potential job, his only skill set was carpentry work. Mm-hmm. And so he only knows a couple people in this little small town that will hire him, and guess what they're doing?
Drugs.
Using drugs. So then here he is, a year and a half, substance free, and he's forced to go back into this environment where he had previously used drugs because he was denied employment through the corporate office. And I felt bad, man. I felt horrible that he had to go through that. And we had a lot of conversations about it. We talked about just getting that seat at the table. And what was that? What did you gain from just being able to tell your story? Mm-hmm. What did you gain from being able to sell yourself to said boss and knowing that she was in support of you?
Hopefully you gained a little hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely did. Also just the way that we live in this instant gratification world, I just felt horrible that there wasn't nothing we could do. It was our hands were literally tied by corporate. And that's just one scenario, Individuals, we were talking prior to the podcast, going back to school, collegiate recovery, right? Checking that box. If you have a drug charge, denies you the ability to receive financial aid.
Yeah, they actually passed an amendment in 2009, I think when Obama came into office. I forget. It's the Higher Education Elimination Act. So they changed it to where if you were now receiving federal aid and you received a drug conviction, then you lost your federal aid. But the organization that I once sat on the board of directors for, Students for Sensible Drug Policy, they estimated before this up to 200,000 people have been denied federal aid. So a lot of times these are lower income families, and this is the only way for this person to obtain a higher education. And in our society, it's the church of education. Everybody thinks going to school and getting a degree is the best thing for you. Granted, there's a lot of fluff taught in education, and not everything you learn in school is applicable in the real world. But either way, having a college degree makes you that much more employable, and also gives you a lot of great experience. And it's an overall great thing. Don't let me deter you from it. But it stinks. If I were receiving federal aid and I got pulled over with a little bit of pot in my car, in Georgia, I would go to jail for that. Federally, I would lose my financial aid. And, 3.5 years into school, that would force me to do a lot of different things in order to obtain an education. And it could be a barrier. We estimated in Georgia there's about 800 or 900 people every year that lose their financial aid due to drug charges. And, you know, a mistake, usually most people grow out of substance use. You know, a lot of times it's recreational, and for most people it doesn't prove to be problematic or chaotic. So, you know, something that most people go through when you're younger can be a stigma and a barrier in a lot of different ways. That's why we can't arrest our way out of this issue. So,
Students for Sensible Drug Policy.
Yes.
Tell me more.
That's my baby.
Uh-huh.
So I came across SDP in 2014. You know, I was fed up with our draconian drug policies. I myself have been in and out of arrest. First time I got arrested, I was 16. From 16 to 24, I was in and out of jail, you know, for things like shoplifting and taking my dad's car out and having a little bit of pot on me. But I constantly found myself, when I was dealing with the substance use issue, I was going through addiction. I was in and out of arrest. Anytime I try to go to school, I get picked up on a warrant. 3 different times the first week of school, I got arrested and had to spend 30, 60, 90 days in jail. You know, that ruined the semester for me. It was a huge barrier. And so when I found SSDP, it was a breath of fresh air. You know, these were like-minded people who were dedicated to ending the war on drugs, because it's not a war on an inanimate object. Think about it. We've been losing a war to a plant to, you know, substances for 40 plus years now. It's a war on people, and more importantly, it's a war on poor people and people of color. As we talked about before, you know, a lot of us refer to it as the new Jim Crow, and it is a way to other people. It's a way to other people who have already been othered, people in Appalachia, people in Asheville that are coming from minority communities that have, you know, systematically had so many barriers thrown up against them. SSDP works to fight that stuff, and right now we're on 300 plus university campuses, and I believe 33 different countries. Just had a good friend speak before the United Nations at the drug conference. I forget what the acronym stands for, what exactly it was. But, you know, I get emails and Facebook messages from kids in Nigeria and Uganda and Ghana and Australia. And, you know, the barriers that they're having to deal with are a lot worse than what we're dealing with here in the U.S. But when you look at who's getting arrested, right now it's younger folks, too. It's people in college. College-age students are profiled. That Western North Carolina sticker on the back of your car, when you're coming through Rabun County, Georgia from Atlanta, that means they're going to pull you over a lot more frequently.
Especially if it's midnight.
Well, if it's midnight, you got a car full of people, you know, they're just going to automatically assume that you're driving drunk, you've got weed, you're up to no good. And, you know, that may or may not be the case. However, you know, young people are targeted. People of color are targeted. You know, the drug war keeps poor people down. They can't afford the attorneys. They can't afford the bond. They can't afford the probation. And so we've got these policies that have been enacted since the 1970s. In reality, they were enacted because of political dissidents. But what's happening, even amongst constitutional Republicans, is they're starting to see that these policies haven't worked. They haven't deterred drug use. They've made things, the drug policies, our current drug policies, have made things worse. When you look at a state like Colorado that's chosen to say legalize marijuana, that money that was once going to drug cartels, to, you know, shady businesses, whomever, not everyone was shady, but, you know, when it goes back to a Mexican cartel, it's not being put to good use. They're buying guns, our guns, and, you know, it's being used to kill people. But now this drug money for marijuana is being used for education. It's educating people about drug use, and they're starting to have an honest conversation about drug use in Colorado. What's funny, though, is in Colorado, teen usage has actually gone down, because it's a lot harder, at least when I was growing up, to get alcohol from the store than it was to get pot from a drug dealer. And that dude I got weed from also had ecstasy. He also had a hookup for coke. You know, we could get these other things through the illegal market. And again, the illegal market, you never know what you're getting. It could be one thing, it could be the other. And there's just a lot of problems with it.
Yeah.
So SSDP, they raise awareness on campus. They go to lobbying events at state legislatures. They lobby before the United Nations. they're just doing great work, and we're saving lives across the country. I would say that SSDP is probably the foremost drug policy reform movement in the world right now.
Wow. Were you a part of starting a chapter at University of North Georgia?
Yeah, I've actually helped start a couple of chapters at North Georgia. We helped with UGA, Georgia State. Well, Georgia State kind of did their own thing. But I've helped start a couple different chapters. I was the founding member of my chapter at UNG. And, we've been recognized before the state legislature for our work. I've probably worked with students from 20 different universities to help establish medical amnesty policies. We worked with the Medical Association of Georgia to equip all university campuses with Narcan. They did most of the work. It was our suggestion. But, they were able to finance over $300,000 worth of Narcan. In that first year, I believe we had 9 reversals. Granted, if it had been used in, say, an area with higher drug use, it might have been more reversals for that money. But either way, it's very important that these college campuses are now carrying Narcan because, as we mentioned before, the fentanyl is completely saturated the drug market. And the drug market, like I keep saying, you never know what you're going to get. And today I liken it to playing Russian roulette. It's just pretty dangerous.
Yeah. Now, these medical amnesty policies that you guys work so hard on, do they have any type of language that talks about alcohol as well?
So that was our biggest hurdle in Georgia, surprisingly. The Prosecutors Association, not going to mention that person's name, but he
Go
said...
ahead and Google that.
Yeah.
Sorry, dude.
So it's actually somebody my dad grew up knowing and stuff like that. But the head of the Prosecutors Association told myself and a group of parents who had lost their kids to drug overdoses that they didn't want alcohol coverage because they were afraid they would lose revenue. Yeah. He didn't say that on TV. I wish I had a damn recorder.
Behind closed doors.
Yeah, well, it was there on the ropes and stuff like that. And, that's blatantly obvious. That particular statement lets you know where the prosecutors stand on things. This is a revenue generator. You've got private probation, private prisons. There's a lot of revenue that's brought in from these misdemeanor arrests, like open containers and underage consumptions, especially in college towns like this. So bail bondsmen, there's all these different groups that make a lot of money off of arresting people. And like I said before, we don't get results when we stick somebody in jail. It just makes things worse for them.
You're talking about people's lives, though, brother. Like, how many alcohol poisonings?
I don't know what the data is on alcohol poisonings.
Oh, yeah, I know.
I mean, think about it, though. Growing up, it's like, wow, we've all been at a party where somebody had too much and they threw them in a shower. Or And, what we've been working on for these 5 years is, let's build that relationship with kids, with drug users, and make them more comfortable to call 911, because the last thing in the world we want is for somebody to die. Whether or not that person who provided the alcohol or the drugs is charged with murder, no matter what, it's not going to bring them back.
Yeah, and if you got a house full of 18, 19, 20-year-olds, what are the chances of them calling 911 when the house is full of booze?
Right, and, if you look at, neurochemistry and neurogenetics, when you're 17, 18 years old, nothing against you guys, a lot of times your brain hasn't fully developed, and I guess that's my excuse for the mistakes I made when I was younger.
Don't worry, me too, man.
But, you're not really thinking properly when you're 18 and, you're trying to get in a nursing program and, your girlfriend just fell out. Some folks don't do the right thing and they abandon them. It's that fear of arrest, that self-preservation that kicks in, that fight or flight, the adrenaline. Your brain's just going haywire. And, our ultimate goal is to let people know that if they call for help, they're not going to get into trouble. Yeah. We don't want you to drink so much that you're going to pass out and your friends are going to pass out. But, the fact that I said, hey, you're not going to get into trouble if you're at this party and you call for help, it doesn't encourage people to go out and drink. They're already doing that.
Yeah, they're doing it.
Every day.
Right, yeah.
There's somebody drinking right now at Western, a beer pong game.
Tune it in.
Yeah, hopefully so. Hey, guys.
What about, we were talking a little bit about the path to redemption a few minutes ago. Do they work on any types of policies, to where if a kid did get in trouble, say they did get caught with a bag of dope, and they did catch some charges, do they have to get, is the policy to remove them from school? Like, what is the, you know what I mean? Like,
so that's a very good question. And a lot of times, schools are their own entities. It's like a corporation, right? So they have their own set of policies. Generally, you won't get a medical amnesty policy passed without developing some sort of path to redemption, which I'm all for. If kids are drinking and they're having a problem and the guy's not doing well in his classes, let's build a support network. Let's get him into counseling. Let's find a collegiate recovery.
Boom. Yeah.
And, building that community of recovery is extremely important on college campuses. Instead of that dude who only knows friends that drink, now there's a counselor and a group of people who are trying to support him throughout college so that he doesn't run to the bottle. He runs to his friends who are having a pizza night, And that's one of the key aspects. And that's something that I like about the college level, too. We have resources to help those people that are dealing with addiction issues. And that's not so much...
And they're funded. Like, you know what I mean? Like, me at 30 years old trying to find recovery, like, I had to pay out of pocket to find, because I didn't have health coverage and all that stuff. Whereas you're on a college campus, included in your tuition is access to the counseling center and access to the wellness center and all these other types of programs that are there.
And gyms and there's so many great things about being in college.
Dude, I use every resource on my campus that I can. Period.
And that's great. But you're also a little bit older and you realize that, hey, this shit's free.
Yeah, dude.
Excuse my language, but it's like I gotta pay out of pocket for this counseling if I'm not in school, And the important part is that person is in school. They are engaged in these types of activities, and they are making positive momentum. If I were to catch a dope charge and get kicked out of school, now I've got a bunch of debt that I have to pay off. I've got a drug conviction, and, those few steps forward are 10 steps back.
Mm-hmm. Setting yourself up for failure. Next thing you know, you're looking at incarceration, or, it's really like it's a rapid decline.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
It's a snowball effect. And, what's great about the medical amnesty policies is for us, for drug policy reform advocates, we saw this as an essential first step to, building positive momentum for people who use drugs.
Yeah. Now, the individuals who participate in the sensible drug policy, is it a club kind of thing? Or
yeah, it's a club. You start a club on campus.
Okay.
There's an advisor that you would reach out to, an outreach director. And you actually, generally, if it's a public university, you'd have to go through Student Congress to get it approved. But, if they're going to approve the Anarchist Club and the Nurses Club, they have to approve you, unless you're out there saying, smoke hella weed, dude. You can't advocate for drug use, but you can advocate for sensible drug policy reform.
Yeah. And I guess that's what I was like, the individuals who are participating in this organization,
all students.
Where do they come from? Like, what types of walks of life do you?
You know what? All different types of walks of life. There's been a big push to incorporate, more women into leadership positions. We definitely have been reaching out to HBSUs. But it's your average college kid. A lot of times it's kids that have gone through the drug war. They've been arrested. They've been polarized by this issue. And that's why they're willing to, stick their flag in the sand and, raise awareness about the wrong and negative effects of our drug policies.
Yeah.
So it just depends.
You're selling me, man. I think we need one over here at Western, dude.
You guys need 10 of them.
Yeah, we totally do. So you work at the syringe exchange in Haywood County?
Yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah, it's Haywood. Occasionally I'm in Jackson County. I'm actually registered with the state to come to Jackson, Buncombe, Transylvania, Henderson, and there's one more I'm forgetting beyond Haywood. So, I'm not in them as regular or as much as I would like to be, but, if there's 40 hours spent in the week, I probably spend 32 of them in Haywood.
Yeah. And you're just like working the counter, like engaging with?
So this is a mobile unit. What we've noticed with rural areas is mobile exchange is better. You can reach more people.
Transportation is just such an issue out here.
Well,
you get caught in that vicious cycle that we were talking about. You don't have a license, you don't have a car, you can't afford insurance and a tag and all that stuff. And what are the chances that you're going to be able to show up on a Tuesday at 5 o'clock to get some clean needles?
Exactly. And, the ultimate goal of a harm reductionist is to meet people where they're at, whether it's a homeless camp or in the Chattahoochee Country Club.
I'm sure you've been to both.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's not just in homeless camps. It's a lot of times in Lake Junaluska, in the country clubs, and the kids there are dealing with a lot of the same issues. They don't have a car, they don't have a license, so I bring them Narcan. I bring them clean supplies. I bring them fentanyl testing strips. And, the premise behind these policies, syringe access programs, is disease reduction. We find that when a syringe exchange is implemented in an area and the syringe exchange is well functioning, on average, it reduces HIV acquisition rates by 80% and hepatitis C acquisition rates by 50%. Not only does it reduce diseases, it prevents things like endocarditis, which if I, without insurance, contract endocarditis, which is basically an infection that makes its way to the heart, when that person winds up at admission, the taxpayers are on the hook for a $500,000 surgery. Hepatitis C medicine can range from $100,000 to $300,000. These are very expensive things to happen, and a 2-cent syringe can prevent them. But it's not all about getting people clean supplies and providing no consequences for drug use. We train people how to use Narcan. We train people how to use fentanyl. And one of the ultimate goals, too, of these policies is to bring people in the continuum of care. I will drop everything that I am doing. I'd walk out of this room right now and leave this interview if one of my participants called me and said, I want to go to detox. I want to go to the halfway house.
Go ahead and say that one more time just for anybody that might have missed that.
So if you guys need a ride to detox, my number is 910-228-7910. Jeremy, again, 910-228-7910. I will drop anything, drop everything, and we will get you into some sort of treatment. We will find the resources. If you don't have insurance, we will work with you to try to find any positive help that we can. Whether you need a ride to the doctor for an infection related to syringe use, that's what these policies are about, are bringing people into that continuum of care. And very often people who are engaging in syringe exchange, they've been isolated, they've been ostracized, they're on the fringes, and we're the first people they meet. So I'm a crisis negotiator, I'm a counselor, I'm a linkage to care operator. I help people with employment options, employment problems. There's a plethora of different things that I've done by the end of the day. And the ultimate goal is to get people back on their feet and going in the right direction. However, our definition of recovery is a little bit different. We look at recovery as any positive direction. So if somebody were to scale back their meth usage and instead of injecting a gram a day and only be doing 0.2 of a gram, for us that's positive. For that person to reduce their meth usage and to get a job, that's a huge step in the right direction. So there's just little things that can go in to making people's lives better, to making them more productive members of society. Now, there's no pressure for people to do those types of things because a lot of times drug users have been shamed, they've been ostracized, they've had all these things happen to them. And, I basically sit out there with my fishing pole every day. It's a metaphor. And I wait for the fish to bite. If I put out this much Narcan or give out these many fentanyl testing strips, eventually somebody's going to ask about methadone. They're going to ask about Suboxone. And I've got the resources to provide them with treatment. I can get them there. We can find a grant to pay for your medication. So that's what syringe exchange is about. Not only does it bring people in the continuum of care, it reduces overdoses.
Yeah.
This is the best possible way to get Naloxone into the hands of active drug users. So we actually supply most of Western North Carolina with their Narcan, whether it's WindCap, Steady, Full Circle, the EBCI, SAP program. They're all getting our Narcan from us. And just an offhand estimate, over the last year, the Narcan that we supplied to folks has resulted in close to 1,000 reversals. So it's 1,000 people that might have been dead, now they're alive, and they have that opportunity. Our motto back home is, where there's life, there's hope. Anybody who's breathing, anybody who's still alive, there's hope for you. There's hope for you to make positive direction, to become a productive member, a taxpayer, whatever it is you think is a good person. Not saying that people who use drugs are bad people, but they've got a lot of things going on with them. And the key is to work through those problems, those adverse childhood experiences, those divorces, the abuse that they took on from a spouse or the child they lost during birth. Those types of things exacerbate drug use, and those are the types of problems that bring somebody into injecting drug use. It's like digging a hole. You just don't see your way out sometimes, and there's so many barriers. And for me, I like to walk people through those barriers. I've gone through a lot of them myself, and it takes somebody who's lived that walk to walk the walk and talk it. Those experiences can't be taught in school. You just don't get them from your master's program at WCU. But for a person like me or some of my colleagues, we've lived through it and we made it. And our ultimate goal is to see that person live through it and make it too.
It's another one of those polarizing topics where when it's brought up, people only see the needle exchange and Narcan distribution, and they don't recognize and see the gray area in the middle about all those things that you just described, right? If I see one more fucking Narcan is free meme on the internet, I'm gonna lose my mind. Okay, people, like it's just there's just so much more to the work that you're doing than providing clean needles and providing Narcan. How do you, putting myself back into the place of a drug user, how do you initially build that relationship and kind of earn some trust?
Well, it's hard. It's a very hard thing. First when I got out there, people are like, this is some Fed shit. They're trying to set me up. Well, I just stay consistent. I maintain an open relationship. People call me all the time, 3 o'clock in the morning and stuff. I don't answer those anymore. I used to, but it's maintaining that consistency, maintaining that open relationship. And the most important thing is coming at it from a non-judgmental standpoint. I took somebody to a detox center the other day, and she walked out of it. Well, the reason was the counselor said, well, I have to be here for 12 hours and I get it because I deal with people like you. Well, there it is, people like you, and that's how a lot of service providers...
That's a professional.
That's somebody with a master's degree probably, who's been dealing with this issue for 10 or 15 years. And, the thing about drug use is we've been taught to other people. And it's not an other, it's my brother, my sister, and that's how I look at it. I'm going to do anything I can to help you. Granted, sometimes I have to say no. There's some things I can't do for you, but my ultimate goal is to help folks. And once I break down with that barrier with one person, he or she or they tell a friend, and word spreads. That's how we get our referrals, is by word of mouth. When I first started the programs, we put up posters everywhere. Nobody called. But a year later, we've been working in these communities, and not only does the person trust us, but their friends trust us. And very often, their family members trust us, even the ones that don't use the drugs, family members. We train them on how to use Narcan. They have our number. You don't know how many times a week I answer a phone call from a probation officer or a DSS agent, because these people know that we're out there to advocate for them. I will sit in court with you all day long and wait for that 2 or 3 minutes to tell the judge, that's a good person. They're going through some stuff. We're trying to work with them, and it works.
Yeah. What about, are there any policies or procedures in place for when an overdose takes place, say in the counties that you're working in? Do you guys do direct outreach, and is Narcan provided to the individual, like immediately from EMS or from the hospitals, or what's that process like?
It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Dealing with hospitals.
'Cause it just seems to me like it should just be
sense.
Automatic.
Yeah.
Right?
And very often the people that are making policy sit in the Ivy Tower, and they have no experience with this.
Until you get there, man.
Well, that's the ultimate goal, is to break down that tower. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. Hear the good news. Like, you don't have to act this way. And, putting Narcan in the hands of EMS, I will say in Marion, what county is Marion?
Just east of Buncombe, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. McDowell County. Okay. Marion's in McDowell.
Yeah, I saw that recently.
So the EMS providers there now distribute Narcan. And, there's two reasons. A, it reduces death, and B, for EMS providers, very often they're on the hook for $4,000 or $5,000 trip to the hospital. So it makes economic sense for them to provide the Narcan, which costs about $75 a kit or so. But there's a lot of apps. There's a lot of people don't want to do it, especially EMS and hospital administrators. The police, surprisingly, were the first ones to jump on board. We need Narcan. We need to save these kids, these drug users, these victims, whatever it is they call them. And, it's just I guess because these are mostly private entities and they're not responsible to taxpayers directly. That person who's sitting in that Ivy Tower just can't get the boot next year election cycle. That probably has a lot to do with it. But, if anybody from Mission, from any of these EMS services is listening, reach out to us. We have the Narcan. We'll provide it for free. You don't have to do anything but get an employee to train them. It takes 2 or 3 minutes. And as Jean says, she can train a monkey. So it doesn't take much to train somebody on how to use this stuff. And, that would make my job a lot easier. We would see a reduction in deaths. To me, that seems like a sensible policy in lieu of sending somebody to jail for murder. But what we're seeing, too, in particular with some of these hospitals, not to name names, when somebody comes in for a drug overdose, they're immediately put under guard. And people who want to visit them can't because there's these barriers. And, there's reasons why this stuff has happened, but you're making it harder for people. And, again, you're othering them, and you're making them not want to come into that continuum of care when they're treated like a criminal. In reality, this is a health issue.
You're treating like a criminal in a medical setting without any charges being brought on. Yeah.
It's ridiculous, and it hurts people.
Yeah. Will we ever see safe injection sites?
So they're coming
in our state, in Western North Carolina.
I predict less than 5 years we'll have
5
one.
years?
Yeah, you'll see them in places like Fayetteville or Charlotte or Greensboro, where there's a more tolerant attitude. And, you might see them in a place like Waynesville, where there's a lot of local leadership that wants to see, this epidemic, if that's what you want to call it. If they want to see this drug issue, the overdose rate reduce, we're seeing them in Colorado. We're seeing them in places up north. And, eventually that will transmute? No, I'm looking for a word. But eventually it will make its way down here to the southern states. And, until that happens, they'll probably be illegal. Safe injection sites are going on every day. And I'm not going to say where they are, but there's places in Atlanta, there's places in North Carolina where folks can use drugs in a safe setting, and there's some sort of medical personnel.
That was my next question, is like, what would be the ramifications, hypothetically speaking?
So I forget the name of the legislative piece, but it was Joe Biden that pushed it, I think in 2002. Essentially, if I allowed my church to be a safe injection facility, under the letter of the law, it's now defined as a crack house, I guess is the best way to put it. It's a place, I think they call it a crack house in the law, And, Biden lost his son to a drug overdose, and that's why he passed it. And, I'm trying to remember. My drug policy friends, if they're listening to this, they're going to hate me because, not hate me. They're going to be like, Jeremy.
You've already brought a ton of data for us tonight, man.
Well, brain fart on that one. But, it would essentially turn a place into, it's the best way to, I don't know any other way to define it, but it's a drug use house, a crack house, and you're looking at 5, 10, 15 years. There's insurance liability issues. Somebody could sue that church or that private establishment for letting that stuff happen. And then, the people that are doing it, like I said, they would be facing jail time for enabling this type of thing.
What type of pushback do you think we would get in the local community here?
Oh, pitchforks, initially, but the thing is like I said, I've brought a lot of data here. Data proves that these type of programs can help people. They can help bring them into the continuum of care, and most importantly, they reduce overdose rates. So when a safe injection site is brought to Jackson County and the overdose rate goes down by 20%, what really can you say? hopefully that'll happen. So
Tying it back to our initial conversation at the beginning of the show, sounds like some legislators are trying to take credit for those rates by dropping these new laws in place. What fentanyl testing? I thought a lot about it lately, and because it's gone from opioids, heroin, into cocaine, the meth, the MDMA, essentially everything that's out there. Are there any barriers to educating drug users on testing their drugs? Because I try to put myself in the shoes of the drug user, and like, would I've ever tested my drugs? I don't know the answer to that question.
I definitely would.
Would you?
Especially when it comes to things like MDMA, where you really, like in Atlanta, National Geographic came through about 4 years ago, and we did a field test. 85% of the stuff was bunk that was being sold on a dance floor at a particular nightclub that night. And
It's
so
probably higher now, right?
Well, then it was methadone, and the methadone bath salts is still in the MDMA and the methamphetamine supply, but now it's methadone and fentanyl. So, I think, it just depends on the person. It takes just a couple of minutes to train somebody on how to use the fentanyl testing strip, but it's also important to remember that the fentanyl testing strip has its limitations. Somebody once told me there's 46 different types of fentanyl. Furfentanols, acetafentanols, the carfentanols. There's a couple different classes. And the testing strips actually only test for 26 of the 46 different types of fentanyl. And if I remember correctly, it doesn't test for carfentanyl. I'll have to look that one up later, maybe send you an email just in case that's wrong. But, there are limitations to it. You can leave them outside too long and they don't work. But, I guess legally, there's no legal ramifications for having a fentanyl testing strip. You might get a police officer who says, oh, this fentanyl testing strip is probable cause. Well, it's not. But, really it's just getting it into the hands of people.
Are you distributing them when you distribute Naloxone and
Every
needles?
day.
Every day? Hundreds?
I've probably distributed at least 20,000 of them, to different syringe exchanges and individuals and harm reduction groups. And what we find is, say, when I give it to a drug user and it tests positive for fentanyl, sometimes they throw it away. It doesn't happen a lot because people are addicted and they need that substance. What happens is they start to make more responsible decisions. So they won't use alone. They'll use less. They'll do a test shot. Things like that can make the drug use a little bit safer. And that's the ultimate goal of the harm reductionist, is to not say, don't do the drugs, but be smart about what you're doing. Look out for your friends. And that's what the fentanyl testing strips encourage.
And you're distributing the Narcan at the same time so that even if it does test positive and they are taking all those safety precautions and things do go worst case scenario, they still have another layer of protection.
Yeah, but people know they're doing fentanyl right now. And like I said before, one of the groups in Asheville does testing, and amongst their participant pool, they found that 90% of the dope going through Asheville right now, heroin, had fentanyl in it. And some people seek out fentanyl because it's cheaper and more powerful. The ultimate goal is to make it safer. I tell folks don't use alone. Again, do a test shot, use with friends. That's probably the biggest thing. And make sure your friends know how to use that Narcan. It takes a couple of steps, but every day in Western North Carolina, fentanyl is being used and Narcan is being used to reverse that person and bring them out of an overdose.
Yeah.
I had a girl who just got into methadone treatment last week. She had overdoses reversed 14 times. The cops reversed overdose 3 times on her. And this particular person, if I post on Facebook, she probably knows who I'm talking about. But the point is, she's alive. And she's now using medicated assisted treatment. And she's getting counseling at the methadone clinic. And instead of spending $100 a day and putting herself out there in really bad, dangerous situations, she's now at the methadone clinic and spends $12 a day. I've got a feeling with her, we're still gonna have a struggle, but Her mom has the Narcan, her dad has the Narcan, her neighbors have it, her friends have it. You know, there's this whole network of people that know how to use the Narcan, and because of us, they now have it. So they're on the lookout. I had a guy, he was telling me a story. He got so he was in recovery, and he'd been clean and stuff like that. Well, he fell asleep at the hospital, and one of the nurses came out, squirted some Narcan up his nose. He was completely sober, woke up, somebody jabbing something up his nose. And then later on that day, he fell asleep at his house, and his dad came in with an intramuscular kit, which is a needle, hit him in the leg with a needle, and he woke up from that, and I just laughed about it, and I'm happy that these folks acted that way,
That's the response you want.
That's the response I want.
Yeah.
And the good thing about the Narcan is, a layman can use it. There's no adverse effects that happen from it. Granted, it's going to attach to the, I believe, mu and delta opioid receptors, but what's going to happen is that person's a little bit ticked off for 30, 90 minutes. So there's really no adverse things that can happen from the Narcan administration. It's not a fail-safe. It's not a cure-all. It's not a panacea, but it's the most vital tool that we have beyond the medical amnesty policies to helping curb the drug epidemic. The overdose rates, they're extremely high, and I can only think of what they would be without Narcan, without medical amnesty. They would be skyrocketed. And the thing about it, too, is we really don't have accurate data on this stuff. Each county, the biggest problem I have with these western counties, too, particular Jackson, isn't reporting OD admission data to ERs. From Jackson County over, the only county I believe that reports it is Swain. Back in Georgia, there's 7 counties that don't report to the GBI. And forgive me, I'm getting on a tangent. They don't report their overdose deaths to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, which is in charge of keeping track of this data. And those counties are Fulton, Cobb, Gwinnett, Rockdale, Henry, Forsyth. There's one more I'm forgetting, but essentially 40% of the state's data isn't included in the overdose deaths, and Atlanta is a drug trafficking hub. It's part of the high-intensity drug trafficking area. And, it kind of stinks when you don't exactly know what's going on.
Why?
Well, it's
Why don't they want to provide the information?
They don't want to admit that there's a problem. And, I'm a public health director, or I'm a sheriff in one of these counties, and we just had twice the number of overdose rates. Well, that's what everybody's going to be asking is, why is this happening? So they avoid those tough questions, and they're reelected. That's the ultimate goal of a politician, of a public servant, is to stay in their position. And, a lot of times denying the issue is a lot easier than actually taking the steps that's necessary to solve the issue. Mm-hmm. So that's why.
It's crazy, man. Fentanyl myths.
Oh, well, there's just...
I had a local sheriff.
Did he Narcan his dog?
Tell me tell me that his officers only carry Narcan to protect themselves.
Well, that's a dick move right there. Forgive me, whoever you are. But
be careful driving home.
Yeah, right. Well, you can't absorb enough fentanyl. Say if I would basically have to lick the bag or put it up my nose. Transdermal absorption rates, you don't get high, you don't feel anything. If you stuck your whole finger down in there, even if it was wet, it's not going to absorb through those mucous membranes enough to cause you to even get high, let alone overdose. And there's another myth of the fentanyl getting in the air. Well, you really have to snort a bunch of this in the air to get it. Like, who's just going to be like, poof, baggy everywhere, breathe it in? That's dumb. And it's not happening.
Because a lot of these myths are preventing, like, first responders, not even, like, official first responders, but, like, EMS or just anybody from responding or reacting.
Well, it's ridiculous, and it's not true. It's a lie. Mm-hmm. I've seen all these news reports, K-9 unit gets Narcan, or there was another one in, like, Ohio or something like that. Local nurse receives award for administering Naloxone to 2 police officers who touched the substance. Well, damn, they were lying. It's a lie. On my computer right now, I've got probably 300 or 400 pages of research that indicates that transdermal, through the mucous membranes in the skin, absorption of fentanyl, any type of fentanyl, is impossible. There are things like fentanyl patches, but there's a catalyst, a chemical catalyst that's added to the patches that allow for a time-release transdermal absorption into the skin. And, if a police officer, that basically just tells you how much that cop knows, or that individual knows about the actual situation that's going on right now. You can't. It's not possible.
The officers who have reacted to, say, consumption of the substance or touching on the substance, absorption, is that like a placebo type effect? Is it something?
So
what do you think?
What happens is they do a drug test, the toxicology report comes back, and there's nothing in the system. I don't know. Maybe the cop's having a bad day and wants to go home early. Maybe there is a placebo effect, like,
Yeah.
Like,
oh my gosh, I touched it.
Yeah, like.
I don't know. I just.
I'm just trying to think, and I honestly think it's attention. That's the only thing I can think of. And it's a way to further ostracize people. Stigma.
Yeah.
That's what it produces, is stigma. And it. There's a place in hell for people who make up lies like that. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't say that, but you're creating what's the word? A lot of hype, hysteria over much ado about nothing. It's not possible whatsoever.
It's like you're putting your personal values ahead of somebody's life. Because that somebody reads that news article and then they're not likely to respond or react when something does happen.
Well,
I work at a department store, dude. We have some individuals who like to shoplift from our store.
Mm-hmm.
And what they do is they'll come in and they'll grab a bunch of clothing items and they'll go into the fitting room and do whatever they got to do to get those things out the door.
Mm-hmm.
And I am always concerned because we found needles in the fitting rooms before. And so I'm always concerned. So if they're in there for more than like 5 to 10 minutes, I'm knocking on the door just to see if they're okay.
Yeah.
Just to check on them.
Do you have Narcan?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah. In our first aid kit.
Do you have it personally?
Oh, yeah.
All right,
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
I got some.
Oh, for sure. For sure, dude. Yeah, absolutely.
So, you don't really have to worry about touching a bag of fentanyl. You do need to be concerned about needles. And not every person who's stealing is doing it to support their drug habit, but it is pretty common. Within those needles, the HIV can live for, I believe, 3 days outside the body, and Hep C can live for 3 to 4 weeks. If you ever did get stuck by a needle, the first thing you need to do is go to the hospital. If you're on the job, your employer should pay for it. There's insurance. You want to do the prep. And, it's not a pleasant thing to go through. Some people have told me it's like going through chemo, and the drugs cost anywhere from $30 to $50 to however many thousands of dollars. However, there are grants, there are insurance policies, there's things that'll pay for this. And, you want to go ahead and knock that bug out if you can, if you ever do get stuck. So if there's a needle on the floor, what I would advise doing is taking a pair of tongs, if, it's your job and you have to mess with it, and putting it in a container like a laundry detergent container and disposing of it in the trash. That container is thick enough where the needle won't poke through. If you're in Haywood County and you see a needle, call me. I'll come and pick it up for you guys. The police department often will do it in most of these localities. Somebody will pick it up if you guys don't want to.
Are like the in public restrooms, the drop boxes, those are cool?
Yeah, we've got, I believe, 28 of them, something like that, 20-something in Waynesville. A lot of times we see them in public restrooms, in gas stations, and truck stops. And in Haywood, I come every 3 to 6 months and dispose of those and take them to a proper dump site and go through that whole process. Those are great ways to keep needles out of the community. Also, syringe exchanges have been proven to reduce needles in the community by, I believe, 66%.
So it's a direct disposal of them, right?
Well, that, and we do good neighborly things. If I'm set up at a church, whenever I'm done doing my thing, I'm going to walk around that church and clean up the needles. In places where there's a lot of injection drug use, there's a certain area in Waynesville where there's a lot of people that use the drugs. So, every couple months I'll walk through with my tongs and my box to dispose of them, and I got gloves on and thick shoes, and I get rid of those needles for people.
The locations, have they put up physical, like, large drop boxes in Waynesville area?
Yeah, we've got them, I believe. It's either 23 or 28 different places.
Okay.
And they're in the gyms, they're in bathrooms. Some of them are private companies.
They just put a bunch up in Cherokee.
Yeah,
recently.
That's great.
The cool part about it was to see the community's response. Like, they were in full support of these things going up. I didn't see one person resisting it. The one question that I would have about them is the location on where they put them. They put them in very public places, not necessarily where people would be using drugs. So, like, the drug user would have to go a pretty good distance out of their way to take advantage of it, if that makes sense,
And, Cherokee's actually got a great syringe access program.
Yes.
My friend Ginger runs it, and, Ginger will tell you they have months where they actually receive more syringes than they gave out that month. But the public drop box thing, it's good to have it in a discrete location. In Haywood, we have it in bathrooms at gas stations where somebody's likely to inject and use whatever it is that they're using. So that's probably the smarter way to do it, is to put it in a more discrete location. But again, you're going to have no opposition. And these boxes cost like $8-10 a piece. So if you get 10, 20 of them, put them in locations throughout the county, they're going to get used. Yeah. And, all it takes is somebody like me to spend 3 or 4 hours and unlock the box and dump it into a place and then take it to a, disposal site.
So these public restrooms that you're putting them in, is it like a privately owned businesses that they get grant access to? Yeah,
and some of them are like gyms. In reality, where I have the most syringes disposed of are in the gyms for 2 different reasons: steroids, and the second reason, probably the most prominent, is diabetics. So it's a free service for diabetics and steroid users, not only injection drug users. But yeah.
That's cool, man. What was it about this harm reduction line of work that attracted you? How'd you find yourself doing this kind of work?
I guess to quote Frost, I took the road less traveled. I found this as an alternative to some of the draconian policies that I experienced as a youth. From 16 to 24, I was in that cycle of arrest, rearrest, and harm reduction works, arrest doesn't. Arresting people, it doesn't work. Granted, it might work for somebody, but, as a person who has used drugs and gone through this type of problem, these are sensible policies that resonate with us. Instead of kicking me while I'm down, I'm getting a hand up. And that's what I needed. I didn't need an arrest. I didn't need more probation, community service. I needed somebody to show me how to tie my shoes, in essence. And that's what harm reduction is about.
Does the Harm Reduction Coalition, can people volunteer to help out?
Yeah, we have plenty of opportunities to volunteer. Sometimes people help us at our fixed locations for syringe exchange. A lot of times people will help us at events by tabling. The biggest thing you can do is be an advocate and go to your community and talk about these policies. Go to your classroom, go to your group, recovery group, and say, hey, the syringe exchange helped me, or I think it's a good idea, and these are the reasons.
Go to your churches and places that you're.
Yeah. I mean, churches. This is the South. The churches they run the show around here, and I think it's a good thing. Churches have helped me a lot over my life, but these conversations need to be had in environments like churches. And if you look at, say, the Christian message, what Jesus said, who did he come for? And what was his most important rule? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Forgive me for mumbling that, but that was the golden rule right there. And you find that not only in Christian philosophy, but in Buddhist and Tao and Judaism. That particular rule, do people how you want to be done. That's what needs to be done here. Is that Christian message needs to be embellished and lived. Look at the words that are in red. Look who Jesus came for again. And, these are the people that we need to help. It's our homeless, our prostitutes. It's our people that are dealing with depression and despair. You need to be that light.
How many conversations have you had surrounding drug users who find MAT, right, and struggle to find a home in a recovery fellowship? Because I see a ton of conversations about abstinence-based programs. And so, like, I feel like these individuals who do find recovery through MAT, though they may attend a refuge recovery meeting or an NA meeting or whatever it is, they might not feel as welcomed as a person like myself who chooses abstinence because,
Well, it's important to remember that there's different strokes for different folks.
Yeah.
Never touching anything again might be the best thing for you. But for opioid addiction in particular, there's a physical dependence. And the number one way to get somebody off of heroin, off of fentanyl, is to wean them off. And medicated assisted treatment does that. It allows for more stability. You're not injecting. You're not chasing a high, chasing a bag all day, all the problems associated with the drug use. So the problem comes in getting these recovery communities, recovery centers, rehab programs, and getting them to accept it, because for so long they've been using this 12-step abstinence-only approach. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you have somebody in that community who's using methadone, embrace them, open the doors for them. We need methadone in jails. We need it in prisons, methadone, Suboxone, Vivitrol. Those are the three main types of medicated assisted treatment. But there's also other things. That person might be dealing with anxiety issues. So, helping them with the depression, helping them get on some sort of stabilized neurochemistry level is an important thing to having recovery. So, if you're a person who runs a community house and you've got somebody on methadone or Suboxone, don't look at it as them continuing to use, but look at it as an opportunity, as a tool that helps that person on that path to recovery.
It's just difficult for the old timers to see that, man. Like, there's been some heated debates within the last few weeks in this local community surrounding that. And I've seen like many examples of individuals like, well, we'll welcome them in, but I can't sponsor you, and like all this stuff. And I'm like, there's barriers.
There's homeless shelters in my community that won't accept you if you're using Suboxone.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, I don't understand that. There's halfway houses that won't take you if you're on methadone or some other MAT. And, the science, the research, it all states that this is a vital tool to curbing the opioid problem, or any drug use problem. These are effective tools to help people. And I guess it's the cliche, axiom, old dog, new tricks. I don't know, maybe, something's built up and it causes dissonance and, they don't want to accept it. But if that's the case, it's important for people like me and you to raise that collective consciousness, to raise awareness, and to let these people, service providers, whoever it is, know that these are effective means to helping getting people off of heroin, off of opioids.
Where do we stand with getting these types of assisted treatments into the institutions that you described, into the jails and county jails? And
it's a process. In Haywood, we've had the conversation with Sheriff Greg Christopher, and he's all for it. Anything that'll help. Granted, I've gone to other counties who just won't have it. And, it's a matter of putting that elected official in office.
Is it a county-by-county basis, or is it something that we can do at a state level?
It's a county-by-county basis. To pay for the funds to provide medicated assisted treatment for all the people that are in jails dealing with opioid addiction, we'll probably need another act of Congress, another CURES grant or something like that puts hundreds of millions of dollars into the state's hands to provide these types of things. But when somebody's in jail, that's the perfect opportunity to, catch them. We don't have any type of rehab facilities. You might have a preacher that goes in and thumps the Bible, which is all good and well, but, it's not giving people the tools that they need to be successful on the outside. granted, that message of being saved and accepting Jesus or Buddha or, not accepting it, whatever it is, that can help people. But it doesn't help them if, physically they're dependent and mentally they can't hold it together. And a lot of these things like Suboxone and methadone and Vivitrol can help the neurochemistry. They can help the brain functionings. They can, do away with the physical dependence. And what you find with people that use opioids is most of the time they're using not to get high, but to feel normal, to stave off the withdrawals. And the withdrawals is the reason that people continue to use. And, it just builds up their tolerance. And it's just, I don't know. Really what it is going county by county right now and working with places like BHG and some of the methadone clinics and making sure that they have a nurse that will take the substance, will take the methadone, and administer it to the particular participant.
Even now, like, is methadone and Suboxone accessible to those who may not be able to afford it?
So it took me a little while to track this down, but we've got $125K in Haywood for methadone. Suboxone can sometimes be a little bit more, but there are grants, there are programs. I'm a big proponent of if there's a will, there's a way. If you want to get on one of these types of treatment, we're going to try to find it for you. Does it happen every time? No. A lot of barriers exist. Money is a huge issue. And so really what it relies on is, proving that these programs work and then allocating more resources for them.
Like, what about all this big conversation about Medicaid expansion? Is that something that would be covered?
Oh man,
this is a whole nother podcast.
Well, that's a wet dream for us.
Yeah.
There's so many services that could be expanded by Medicaid, having Medicaid expansion. A lot of the folks that we're dealing with, they have Medicaid, and a lot more could benefit from Medicaid expansion because that would take care of most of their medical costs. And the cost of treatment is probably the number one barrier. Most people can't afford to go to a rehab. There are free state-run detoxes, but, it's a 7-day program, most of them. So having the money for these programs is essential to incorporating more people into it.
From what I understand, the states that have expanded Medicaid and invested money in harm reduction, like what the work you guys are doing, have significantly reduced overdose rates and significantly increased individuals finding recovery. And
yeah, I'm thinking of Massachusetts, however you say it. Forgive me, Southern boy trying to say it. Places like New Hampshire where they have something called the Spoken Wheel, where there's a central hub, and then there's all these different little spokes like harm reduction, medicated assisted treatment. There's all this money being put into these resources, and the more harm reduction, the more medicated assisted treatment, the more detox, the more rehab, the more recovery, the more collegiate recovery, the more resources we have, the more able we are to grab people and bring them into this fold.
Yeah. Well, listen, Jeremy, you're a bad motherfucker, dude. I tell you what, I appreciate you coming on and having this conversation with me. You're super knowledgeable. You're an inspiration, asset to this community, man. We need more guys like you out there doing the footwork, man. I really think that though it's not like it's difficult to have, a bunch of you guys out there on the streets and having those personal engagement, personal conversations, it's so vital. It's so vital to the community and to the well-being of our community.
Well, it's possible, and when you implement these programs, you find that it's cost beneficial as well. So you're spending less money on endocarditis infections, less money on trips to the hospital. In reality, having somebody like me saves the community not only lives and all these positive things, but we're saving a lot of money too.
Cool, man. How can people connect with you? You got an email address or anything where they can?
The best way to connect with me is my email. I'll give you my work email. It's jsharp@nchrc.org. So it's jsharp@nchrc.org. I'll go ahead and throw my my work number out there just in case somebody needs some Narcan, or if you're one of these communities and you need clean supplies. It's 910-228-7910. I generally make runs from 1 to 5. Call me a little bit before 1. We'll put you on the list, and if there's anything I can do to help you, I will do it.
Appreciate you, bro. Thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed it, dude. Thank y'all for listening to NC Raw. Visit our website at www.ncraw.life to subscribe to the podcast. Drop your email address in the little subscription box to receive the show in your inbox every week. Thanks for tuning in. Y'all have a good night.